Hello everybody, and welcome to a new episode of Gaming in the Wild, a video games podcast about games from the artistic, creative side of the tracks, from indie to AAA. My name's John, I'm your host. I'm recording on a Saturday night, the 9th of September, out here in Reykjavik, Iceland, as always. And this week's episode is going to be about the game that is on everyone's lips. It is the game of the moment, for sure. It has swept across the gamer internet. It seems to be dominating the conversation. It is a fascinating game that has been long awaited. It is, of course, Bethesda's Starfield, the first new game that they have made other than Elder Scrolls and Fallout for 25 years. So it's a big event. And I was a little on the fence about this game. I wasn't one of those people who was pre-ordering the beautiful custom controller that was released for the game, and I wasn't waiting with bated breath for it exactly. I kind of came into it with an open mind, I would say. I gave some opening thoughts about it last week after 3 hours, just after the early access had begun, and I'm much deeper into the game now, and I've been having an amazing time with it. There is a lot to like in this game. Of course, there is a lot of Bethesda-ness in it too. There are some strange systems, but there is an overall sense of wonder in this game that I've really been enjoying. So I have a very long list of notes to talk about, and I'm really looking forward to diving into it and talking about Starfield. But before we do, let me just mention, this is a Patreon-supported show. If you are a first-time listener, then I'm glad that you found the podcast. And if you're a long-time listener, I think we've got a good podcast for you today. If you are interested in supporting this podcast, you can do so over at Patreon. We're on 49 patrons, and the target that I set for myself at the start of the year was to get to 50. So you can go over to patreon.com/gaminginthewild and sign up for $1 a month to get bonus episodes and access to our wonderful, friendly, cozy Discord server. We've got a dedicated channel for Starfield in our Games of the Moment section, and it has been popping off. I've learned a lot of things about this game from what other people have been playing. We've all been having such different and interesting experiences and sharing them in Discord. So if you want to join in, that's patreon.com/gaminginthewild to become a patron of the show. But I think this is going to be a long one, so it's a short intro today. Let's just get straight into it and talk about Starfield. This game has such a good soundtrack, by the way. They've gone full Star Wars with it and done really well. So Starfield is a game that is out on PC and Xbox Series. It is by Bethesda, of course, their first new game for 25 years. It is directed by the famous Todd Howard. And the soundtrack is just wonderful, honestly. It's an orchestral ambient soundtrack with a lot of different moods in it by Inon Zur. And I found myself transfixed by the soundtrack, actually. I've been humming the soundtrack during my working days and just going about my day. The music is really something special. This is, of course, a really big game. It had a bit of a fraught discourse around it. It's currently sitting at 87 on Metacritic for PC and 85 on Xbox. I've read a lot of reviews on this one because I was very interested in where people would come down on it. And one specifically stood out to me from The Guardian. The Guardian had to say about it, Starfield, as with Bethesda's previous work, requires its player to submit to the spell that is being cast. The rewards for those who can overlook the often awkward delivery of dialogue, bodies that glitch through scenery, the confusion of the menus, and flimsy combat are considerable. Because of that feeling of electric possibility, when the horn section swells as you touch down on a new planet, stride into the nearest settlement, and pick up whatever threads of story interest you, never wanes. There have also been some pretty controversial reviews on this one. IGN specifically has gotten a lot of flack for their review. They gave it a 70. It was a somewhat tortured-seeming review by the infamous Dan Stapleton, who has defended his review at length in that 70 mark. I listened to him talking about it on the IGN Xbox podcast. He seems to love the game, but also to be very annoyed by it. He's currently voluntarily playing a New Game Plus after 60 hours, so I think that tells its own story in a way. Very interesting review. I'll put a link to that in the show notes if you're interested. But it came down at 87 and 85, pretty respectable stuff. As for what I would give this game, I'm just glad I don't have to, honestly. I think I need more time to get a really settled opinion about this one. I'm very much in the flow of playing the game. My thoughts on this one are still evolving, so it's going to be a conversation in that spirit of just relating the experience, of talking through the game. And I think I will end up doing another podcast about this one later to get into spoilers and to come down with a final verdict on it. How Long to Beat has this one at 18 hours for the main quest, which is astounding to me, but main and sides comes in at 50 hours played. And I think that's pretty interesting, actually, because I don't think this is a game that has traditional side content. There's a big caveat on those How Long to Beat hour times, because a lot of the side content in this game is optional. So it is technically true that it is side content, but it's some of the best stuff in the game, and it's a very, very meaty game. So I think if you want to engage with this one fully, you're going to be playing 50 hours plus probably. There is a completionist score of 205 hours on How Long to Beat, which I guess illustrates just how much there is to do. I'm currently at 44 hours played, and I feel like I'm not even halfway through the game. And for reference, 44 hours in a week is more than I had in Tears of the Kingdom after the first week, I think. This game has really become a bit of an obsession for me. It's that kind of all-in fervor. It's the best kind of feeling if you're into video games, where you wake up thinking about playing it. It's on your mind throughout the day as you're working and going about your life, and you just can't wait to get into it. In fact, today I was out for some fresh air. I went for a hike around some red volcanic craters on the edge of Reykjavik, and I was humming the Starfield theme the whole time and jonesing to be back home and get back into the game. And the developers described this game by saying it's a next-generation role-playing game set amongst the stars. Create any character you want and explore with unparalleled freedom as you embark on an epic journey to answer humanity's greatest mystery. And my little synopsis of Starfield so far is that it is a vast spacefaring RPG that's dizzying in its scope, depth, variety, and possibility. It's an uneven and characteristically idiosyncratic experience, but after 44 hours it has inspired awe, wonder, and a very pure kind of gaming satisfaction. And I do have a little bit of history with Bethesda. I'm not like an all-in super fan or anything, but I've played, I think I've got 40 hours in Skyrim. I got quite far into it and hit a bit of a difficulty spike and just trickled off it the way that people do. I also played Fallout 4, and I absolutely loved Fallout 4. I got neck deep in that game. I've got over 100 hours in Fallout 4. And something that struck me about Starfield as I started to play it was that feeling of slipping into something comfortable. Fallout 4 was a very comfortable gaming experience. There's something about the Bethesda formula of exploring, discovering, having strange conversations with interesting characters, looting and shooting and going about all of the stuff that is in a Bethesda game. And Starfield is very much that experience, just in a new format, in a sci-fi setting. But I was struck right off the bat by the familiarity of the Bethesda game experience for all of its highs and lows that I think are pretty well documented and well known. Starfield felt comfortable right from the start. And I've got a lot of notes here, so I'm going to divide up this podcast a little bit. I'm going to talk about Starfield as a role-playing experience. I'm going to go into a bit more depth than I did last week about the game's universe, about the factions, the cities, the history. It's an interesting universe they've created here. I'm going to go into the combat. I'm going to talk about some best moments without any spoilers at all, and revisit my gripes from last week. Even after 3 hours played, I had a few gripes about inventory and about space travel, so I'm going to revisit that and see how that is bedded in after this long playtime that I've had in the last week. I'm also going to touch on a few thoughts about this peculiar brand of American nostalgia that permeates this game that I found really interesting, and then just round up at the end with some general thoughts and analysis about the game at large, its successes, its failures, and its quirks. It's going to be fairly spoiler-free, I would say. No big story beats, no big reveals of abilities that you get, and all of that kind of main quest stuff. But I do really want to dive into that stuff too, so I think I'll do a spoiler cast about this one later down the line to get into all of those details. So let's start off with some broad strokes about creating your character and getting started and the shape of this Starfield universe. Starfield is set at an interesting point in humanity's future. It is a high sci-fi universe in a post-Earth world where humanity has had to leave Earth and spread out into the stars. And so we have a whole history, a whole speculative human history here. It's really fascinating, and you get a little taste of it right at the start in the character creator, when you can start picking traits and backgrounds for your character. You can decide if they are part of a faction, what planet they were born on, and some other interesting background details that will give you your starting perks, your starting skills, a couple of ticks on the skill chart and so forth. But when you first see it, I didn't research this game much before I started playing it, but I do know that Bethesda did put out on their website a timeline of this universe, so I think it's good starting information to have when you're deciding what kind of character you want to have. And there are a couple of different factions that come up right at the start. There are 5 main factions. They all have homeworlds, they all have politics, they have political relationships. Some of them have been at war and reached armistice and are at peace. Some are still at large out in the universe. There's a lot of politics in this game. There are significant characters for each faction, different quest lines attached to them. And the main one that you're going to be interacting with at the start of the game is Constellation, a privately funded explorer society, which is like an oddball collection of misfits and dreamers from various walks of life. They're a weird bunch. They're kind of a flagrantly outlandish bunch, all quite interesting in their own way, and you'll be spending a lot of time with them. But they share a NASA kind of vibes, optimism for possibility, curiosity and discovery. And Constellation are the main quest, so you're going to be spending a lot of time talking to the Constellation guys throughout your journey. And Constellation is based on New Atlantis, which is the home city of the United Colonies, another one of the big factions. This is pretty much like a government of humanity in a way, a little bit like the old Earth. All of the governments of the old Earth dissolved together in this expansionist period. They have politicians, they have big shiny buildings, they're very official, and they have a security force called the Vanguard, which you can choose to join early in the game. There is also another sect of humanity called Freestar. These guys are like separatist cowboys. They are separate from the United Colonies. They are independently minded. They kind of live free or die, rugged common folk farmsteaders, and they have a cowboy vibe to their whole situation. But they have a lot of money and influence as well, and they are a power in this universe. But of course, humanity did fragment somewhat after that initial expansionist period. You will also come across the Red Fleet. This is a group of pirates. They are kind of antagonists. You will be shooting a lot of these Red Fleet guys, but they are also a valid faction in the game that you can get involved with if you wish. And then there is a mega corporation called Ryujin Industries that you'll come across later on the cyberpunk city of Neon. You can apply for a job there and get involved with that, so that's a whole other thing as well. So you have 5 main factions here: Constellation, the United Colonies, Freestar, the Red Fleet, and Ryujin. We also hear a lot about the Varun in the start of the game. This is an extremist cult, like a religious cult, and they've got a crazy belief that a giant serpent is going to return and swallow up the universe. They're antagonists too. They're like a dark cult that you'll encounter. I'm not quite sure if the Varun are a viable sect as yet that you can join and get involved with, but you can choose a Varun upbringing as your background in the character creator. And all of these different factions, you can only choose one, and you will get different dialogue options based on what you chose when you're speaking to someone from that same faction. So it starts to matter. They add depth, they add stakes, they add a personality and a background to your character. There are places to visit to get involved with all of them. There are people to talk to, quests to go on. They'll have hubs and so forth. But they also open up possibilities in how we roleplay and how we imagine and create our character. Starfield is one of those games with a character creator where you build your character from scratch. You make their physicality. There are no set characters to make. So the character becomes like an avatar for you in this world. It's pretty interesting to pick these backgrounds without knowing much about them. So I picked Freestar Collective. I'm not exactly sure why. I was just picking one when I was making my character. So Freestar is my faction affiliation, the cowboys of the outback of space. Didn't really know what it was. And then for my actual trait, you can be all kinds of things. You can be a cook, you can be a Ronin, you can be a bounty hunter. I picked Pilgrim as my lifestyle. Again, I was doing it pretty much on the fly and without a huge amount of thought. But the description said that you would be a wanderer who is searching the universe on a kind of a spiritual search. And having done this without that much thought, as I've been playing the game, I realised that I have been role-playing it to a degree. Like in the background of my mind whilst I'm playing, I have invented a kind of a headcanon for my character. So if you're a freestar cowboy, that's not exactly compatible with the pilgrim lifestyle, but the way that I've come to think about my character is that they are brought up in the freestar tribe, which means that it was like an outback farming kind of thing. I kind of think of Luke on Tatooine at the start of Star Wars, but my character felt some friction with that life and went out into the stars on a journey, try and find out more, try and find out who they are, and they have some difficulty reconciling that instinct to leave and grow and explore with the call of home. And that's so interesting. I don't usually do that kind of thinking in games, but from that menu that I picked in quite a slapdash way, I have ended up with a thought of who my character is, and it does influence the kind of dialogue choices that I make. So I think it is quite an effective starting set of different things to choose from when you're making your character. I'm very, very interested in the directions that people go in when they're choosing their character. I'd love to hear about yours. You can find me on social media at Gaming the Wild and all of that kind of stuff, and of course in the Discord. But I really do like hearing stories of which choices people made. And I am happy with how my character came out. I will also say that faction quests are some of the best content in this game so far. So you can join all of these factions. You can join several at once. If you've played Fallout or Elder Scrolls games, you will be familiar with this. So you are invited pretty early on to join the United Colonies, the UC, to join the Vanguard and do security missions in order to attain your citizenship and to be able to buy a home on New Atlantis. And I didn't do that initially because I don't think for my character, becoming a space cop is not exactly on the menu. They're like this wandering lost soul. So I skipped over the UC faction quest until I talked to a friend about it who said that the faction quests aren't something that you should pick and choose in that way. It felt very natural for me to just skip over that entirely and just get on with the game. But my friend said, no, you should really go and dig into that. So I went back and played some of the UC missions, and I have to say, these are some of the most interesting scripted sections of gameplay with very, very interesting environments and very, very thrilling story stuff. So I'm really glad that I went back. And if you are playing this game and role-playing it the way that I'm role-playing it, I think that most people would probably pass over the Space Cop opportunity. But my advice is to go and to play all of those faction missions, because it really is some of the best stuff in Starfield. And it kind of made me wonder, actually, do Bethesda imagine that most players would dive straight into that lifestyle and just take up that UC Vanguard security forces cop role? Because a lot of people that I've talked to skipped over it entirely as well. People are pretty suspicious of joining up with armies and police forces and authoritarian state-led organizations, and probably don't intuitively want to join them. So I'm curious if Bethesda think that their player base are the kind of people that would just go for that, because a lot of the best content in the game is stuck behind those walls of having to engage in those missions. But my advice is do all of them. Even if it is counter to your instinct, get involved with the UC storyline. It's just brilliant gameplay. And get involved with the Freestar quest too, and all of the opportunities that come up are there for the taking. But one thing that ties them all together, in my experience so far, is that there is an awful lot of combat in Starfield, which shouldn't come as too much of a surprise, I guess. When I think back to Skyrim, it was often going down into dungeons, often going through enemy-packed encampments and that sort of thing, and the same in Fallout. And it's the same here too, so you're going to spend an awful lot of time in combat in Starfield. And the combat seems to have divided people somewhat, and it is very simple in some ways, but for me, not in a bad way. I think it has a lot less layers than the combat in other comparable open-world contemporary games, like, say, Cyberpunk 2077 or Horizon, especially Horizon, which has such good combat. It has stealth, it has hitting components off of machines, removing their weapons, stripping them down, elemental stuff, tagging enemies, strategic approaches, and so forth. There hasn't been so much of that in Starfield for me so far, But what's here is super solid, in my opinion, even if it is a little bit simple. You can fly through it pretty quickly, and it's just very, very fun, I would say. It's super serviceable, super enjoyable combat. The enemy AI in this game it at least exists. It's not bad. Like, most enemies will show basic intelligence. They will seek cover. They will shoot from cover. They'll poke their head around a corner. They may fall back or flee if you are winning decisively, or they may press in harder if they are dealing heavy damage, and you can hear them crying out to each other. It's quite fun. It's quite fun to do. And they do feel like they are on maneuvers. They will throw grenades from on high. Sometimes they will have snipers. Sometimes they will have melee people. One of my favorite things to see in this game is enemies using jetpacks, which is just fantastic. They may use a jetpack to move up a level to come and find you, to surprise attack you, just shooting up onto a walkway like Boba Fett, or to fly down and hide behind cover. Always very impressive to see every single time, this jetpack enemy movement. And if you do manage to shoot an enemy on the jetpack, then it may explode and they may just shoot around in the sky before crashing and exploding in a really satisfying way. Most enemies have one health bar that you can just pick away at. Headshots matter. You can get critical hits and that sort of thing. Some have several health bars that you have to burn through. So there are grunts and slightly tougher enemies, and they do come in different flavors as well. Some of them are melee enemies that only have like a cutlass or a sword or a knife, and they may charge you. Others are more like snipers throwing grenades down, that sort of thing. And I pretty much enjoy the combat all the time. It's really fun to just pick out a random industrial outpost or an abandoned factory on a moon from the planet selector, land there, and just see what's going to be there. Sometimes it's civilians who want to chat. Sometimes it's scientists who need a hand, want you to go out and plant some scanners or go into a cave and collect some data. But a lot of the time it's going to be bandits, it's going to be spacers who are kind of space-bound outlaws, or it's going to be Varun, or it's going to be mercenaries. So you kind of work your way through these encampments, fighting enemies in different spaces, in tight quarters or in big halls, or on the exterior of encampments and that sort of thing. It is really enjoyable. There are some wrinkles to it as well that may be familiar to Fallout players. For example, robots and turrets. Often the spacers and the pirates will be occupying abandoned outposts where there are security systems that may be either turned on for the bandits or dormant. And you can find terminals as you're coming through, taking out enemies, looting. And if you can get into a terminal, you can turn the security systems on. It's something very satisfying. It will be familiar to Fallout 4 players of finding a terminal, turning on the security guns, having them not shoot at you, and then watching them just mow down all of your enemies. It's very satisfying. You will come across locked doors and locked terminals. There's a fun little mini-game for lock picking and terminal hacking. It's the same game, but you have to rotate these shapes to fit them into a lock, and there are several layers sometimes and skill levels and things like that. So as you are going through combat encounters, you're also hacking, locking, using these robots, using turrets, fighting grunts, fighting stronger enemies. There is a whole section of your inventory dedicated to aid, which is for med packs that you can use in combat, or different buffs like taking less damage or moving faster, more endurance, that kind of thing, dealing more damage. So there are strategic elements to it in that sense. Something that I wasn't expecting, there's another really fun wrinkle in this game, is that often you'll be fighting in different gravity environments. Some have Earth-like gravity, so you're just walking around as normal. Some have low gravity, so your jumps will make you float in the air. Some have zero gravity, so you're fighting in zero-G environments in, for example, a powered-down space station, where you're jetpacking through these corridors with all of the ephemera and crap like folders and pens and wrenches floating in the air. And that has been really satisfying too. It's not something that I've encountered previously, this ground-borne FPS combat, and then sometimes it being zero-G combat, which is just very, very fun and feels amazing. And there are different combat playstyles available as well. You can go full melee. I know Carlos over on the So Video Games podcast, as usual, has gone for a sword build. So he's like this space Ronin guy who's charging in and doing close quarters, heavy damage combat, which also opens you up to taking a lot of damage. I've played it more as a cover shooter in the Mass Effect style. And a big part of the reason that I chose that is because I really enjoy the weapons in this game. There are a vast range of different weapons that you pick up from dead enemies, finding chests, that kind of thing. There are guns galore, basically. Every enemy is carrying a weapon that you can then loot. They are really, really vastly diverse, from energy weapons like laser guns, pistols, different kinds of pistols with different fire rates, ranges, powers, shotguns, rifles, sniper rifles. There are all kinds of different weapons, and you're constantly evolving your arsenal, and you can set them to hotkeys or to use the D-pad rather on a console. So you're constantly cycling between weapons based on situation. And as a not very dedicated FPS player, I have found it really, really fun, actually. I've used a lot of machine guns. Some of my favorites are a radioactive Grendel, which is a large magazine, big, bulky machine gun. And it's radioactive, so it's a special trait for that weapon. That means that sometimes when you hit enemies, they'll get acid damage and they'll get radioactive durational damage as well. Really, really fun. Makes them kind of fizz in a really satisfying way. I'm also really enjoying using a shotgun with a 9-clip magazine. The shotgun, as you point it, has quite a broad target, but if you find an enemy with the reticle, it will become smaller and more specific, so you can target like a headshot or go for them in other ways. I also found a missile launcher pretty early on and some really powerful military-grade machine guns. And I've really enjoyed creeping through these encampments, just using my different guns for different situations. I did find a legendary weapon, my first one. It was a silenced, scoped, very powerful assassin machine gun. So I've been using that to pick off enemies from afar with headshots. Because it's silenced, you can take them out and it won't alert all of the other enemies. They won't just charge in. So my playstyle has already been evolving. It reminded me a little bit of Cyberpunk when I started off with a run and gun kind of style, but grew into more melee weapons, more assassinations, more technology weapons. So I think that as this game progresses, I'm really looking forward to seeing what opens up in the skill tree and what other weapons I'm going to find on this journey. And I think part of the fun of the weapons too is that they all have different perks, they all have different elemental effects. There are basic versions of every weapon, but you will sometimes find one that is like a concussive shotgun, or a furious shotgun, or a demoralizing shotgun. If it's demoralizing, then it may cause enemies to flee when they take damage from that weapon. If it is a furious one, if you get in successive hits, each one will do more damage. So that's amazing to have like a furious quality on a machine gun where you're getting a lot of successive hits. They are all customizable in the Fallout style. If you find a weapons table, you can switch out barrel, grip, sights, magazine, and customize them. I haven't dipped into that too much, I think purely because there is quite a fast turnover of weapons in this game, and that you're always finding something better than what you have. So I haven't really put a huge amount of effort into tweaking and perfecting the weapons that I have, my preferred weapons, because I'm always finding new versions of them, if you know what I mean. But maybe that is something that some people will be enthusiastic about. But for me, it has paid off well to not get too attached to my favorites, because I will eventually be trading them in at the trade terminal when something better comes along. And that brings us neatly to looting. A big part of combat encounters is looting the shit out of every place that you go. You'll be looting enemies for their helmets, spacesuits. You'll be finding safes that you can unlock for ammo and cred sticks and different kinds of weapons. There are weapon display cases that you can lockpick. There are coolers full of food. There are wardrobes full of clothing. Nothing is safe from the player in this game. I take every gun that I find, basically. I max out my inventory, pick and choose the most valuable ones, because you can sell them after you've done a dungeon or a base or an encampment. And it's a fun part of the game to loot, to compare the weapons that you found to what you have, and then afterwards to sell off the ones that you don't want. It's a fun sort of looter-shooter sort of cycle that is definitely part of the Bethesda formula. You're picking up everything that you find and then either choosing to use it, to replace an old weapon with an upgrade, or to sell it. But a side effect of this is one of the first big stumbling blocks in this game, I would say, and that is inventory and encumbrance. Because you are going through these bases where a big part of the incentive is looting, but you have a set amount of inventory which can be opened up in the skill tree. You'll often find yourself at maximum weight capacity, which means you can no longer fast travel back to your ship afterwards. You have to schlep across the planet's surface to get out of there. You can give stuff to your companions to use their inventory space, but you'll quickly fill all of those up as well. And although it's worth it to sell all of that stuff for heaps of cash, it does mean a lot of menus, especially in the midst of combat encounters, where you're dropping 3 basic machine guns to pick up 2 big swords. Then you're dropping those 2 big swords because you found a big laser rifle that you can sell for a packet or that you want to keep. So there is a lot of menu in the combat, and I really do wish that there was something a little different here. The weight limit sucks. It breaks up the flow of combat encounters when you're pausing to drop things, to pick up more things, and then dropping those things to pick up even more things, realizing that you're carrying a ton of aluminium that you might need later, dropping all of your aluminium to pick up some valuable gun to get more credits. And it's just a bit of a pain in the neck, really. I do wish that they had employed a Horizon-like system overflow, where when your inventory is full, your stuff can be sent to a stash to be picked up later or to be traded in at a trade terminal. It wouldn't be out of the realms of science fiction to have a limitless inventory where stuff is just beamed back to your ship in some way. It's a little bizarre to me that the inventory system wasn't addressed in a more robust way in this game. I am a little confounded that they decided to go for the old school Fallout system. I guess one of the concessions they did make is that encumbrance works differently in this game. So you won't have to walk incredibly slowly. It's not like you can't move when you're weighed down. Instead, you will lose your oxygen faster, which is like an endurance meter. So they have tried, but I think it's a swing and a miss, because it is still annoying to be maxed out on weight all of the time, and to not be able to fast travel back to your ship after a big, long dungeon or space station experience. You just have to slowly trot across the planet's surface. Definitely something that could have been improved. But of course, before you can get into all of this fun combat and looting and all of that sort of stuff, you have to get there. And space travel is another one of the sticking points of Starfield, I would say. It has been for both players and critics. As I read out Bethesda's description of the game at the start of this podcast, they did say that it offered limitless new forms of next-generation exploration. And I think it was a big disappointment for people to discover that the space travel in this game does not include a lot of freewheeling, flying between the planets in that No Man's Sky style. It is actually menu heavy. It is basically a glorified fast travel system, loading screens between every planet surface and space, transition, and then once you're in space, it's another loading screen. You have to look at the map, you have to choose another planet, and you get another little cutscene of your spaceship jumping, and then you're back in orbit around your next planet. You have to scan the planet, use a menu again to get down onto the surface again. So it's a very menu-heavy fast travel system moving through space in this game. And it's a huge shame. I have gotten used to it, I will say, since the last time I talked about this game. And I am making my peace with it because there is just so much on offer. It's just a little bit of a clunky system with a few too many clicks between one place and the next. The way that I've come to think of it is that it's more like being a navigator than being a pilot. You select planets, you punch them in, you hit go, and then you just sit back. And I think a lot of people were expecting to be the pilot in this game, in that No Man's Sky style, but you're not really. You're a navigator, you're using a computer, you're using a map. And the menus are a little bit confusing. You have to go in and out of solar systems, planets, surface maps, and then zoom right back out to see the galaxy. And it's just a lot. It never feels intuitive. And I do wonder if something might have been manageable here, just to allow you to fly between even coming out of Earth's atmosphere, going into your ship, and then flying to the moon. You can't do that. So the moon is a whole separate thing from Earth. You have to use the menus to get there. It's just a bit of a shame. It does make for a somewhat disjointed experience. And I do think that maybe some of the reaction to this is the substance of how this works. But I also think that the reaction is something to do with how this game was explained and presented and marketed. You know, Bethesda's talk about it being their ultimate dream sci-fi game that they've dreamed of making ever since the studio was founded. You expect it to have that to embody that freedom in space feeling. And it kind of doesn't. It breaks it down into lots of little chunks, lots of clicks, lots of maps. And it's a little bit of a shame. It's not like they tried to hide it exactly, you know, but it definitely had the atmosphere, this NASA core journey into space, this outwards free journey, explore an infinite universe rhetoric. Our imaginations just ran with it. And No Man's Sky exists, and when it comes to all of that stuff, is better than Starfield. Very, very different games. But I think that all of our collective imaginations, we saw some of the footage they put out of the game, of mining on planets, of all of that stuff, and our minds just went, oh wow, it's No Man's Sky, but also a huge RPG. The planet map, scanning planets for resources, mining with a laser, scanning animals for XP, scanning entire planets, and then trading for data. All very No Man's Sky stuff, but I don't think it was too much of a logical leap to imagine that the most important No Man's Sky component of all, the freedom to fly around space, may have been included in this game, but it just isn't. But I think it's also fair to say that whilst No Man's Sky has that wonderful planet to orbit to other planet, seamless spaceflight experience, No Man's Sky, it's a game that I have put a lot of time into and that I love. And it is a really relevant comparison for Starfield, but No Man's Sky is a bit of a barren game in many ways. The thing that is missing in No Man's Sky is really conversational role-playing content. It's a huge sandbox, but it can often feel like a bit of a hollow experience with all of that procedurally generated planets that are, after you've seen 10 or 20 or 30 or 40 or 50, they start to feel a little bit the same. You know that you can expect a certain set of biomes. You know that you can expect to see a certain amount of randomly generated animals with different limbs and different color schemes and all that sort of stuff. And it all does start to blend together. And what you get in Starfield instead is very, very cool, bespoke content. Like, you get these characters, everyone's got lines to say to you. All kinds of characters that you meet have conversation for you. And it feels very deep in that way. Even if you rock up to like a random human civilian settlement on a distant moon just to see what is there, you may well find characters that have backstories that they will tell you about. They'll tell you about where they're from. They'll tell you about their life on that planet. So what was missing in No Man's Sky, I think, was a little more substantial content. And Starfield has that in spades. I've really, really enjoyed the dialogue. I've really enjoyed the world building that even minor NPCs have for you. They just have so much to say, and they really do flesh out this universe and make it feel very special. So whilst you might be lacking that interplanetary astronaut feeling, you are getting a much richer, deeper universe. And I think it's important to talk about the strengths of this game as well as the things that we were expecting that were missing. And I think in the spirit of celebrating what Starfield does well, because it is just such an awe-inspiring universe that has been created here, and it's so deep and wonderful, I think I'd like to just talk through a few of the best bits of my journey so far. I'm going to steer away from spoilers, from major faction quests and that sort of stuff, but there have just been a lot of moments here that have really pulled me in. So as I was playing through the game, I noted down just some small moments that really blew me away. One of them was a bar conversation. So every planet has a bar. You can go there to hire crew for your ship with different skills and that sort of thing. There are NPCs there. There are quests you can pick up. And in a bar on Gagarin, which is a desolate former military base on a dusty planet, I met a former mech pilot who explained to me that mechs had been made illegal after a colony war. And it's just a random NPC. It's not like a big story beat or anything like that. And they told me the history. They told me about how mechs were manufactured on Gagarin, how they were a mech pilot in that war. And now that mechs have been made illegal, they want to travel the system and document the experiences of mech pilots who have been cast out of their profession, basically. They wanted to document the diaspora of mech pilots. And they talked about how being a mech pilot is like, or losing your mech is like the symptom people get when they lose a limb. They get a ghost limb feeling, and how being a retired mech pilot is like having a whole body ghost limb, where you feel like you're missing this machine body that you once had. It was an awful lot of amazing detail packed into a very short conversation. And when I saw them later at work in a workshop, they said, "Are you here for your copy of my book? You're still a bit early," which I thought was a really nice touch. Also, some of the ambient moments in the game are some of the best stuff. It's just the most thrilling stuff. Like, I was standing outside of a colony called Sidonia, which is a dusty industrial Mars colony. And I was just standing outside my ship. I think I was deciding where to go next. And suddenly my controller started rumbling real hard, and there was a huge roaring sound from above. And I just stopped what I was doing, and I got goosebumps. I started looking up at the sky, the way that you would in real life if a massive plane went overhead or a thunderclap happened or something like that. And this giant ship came out of the sky and descended down towards the landing pad, and I just watched it land, ran over to the landing pad. It was bigger than any ship I'd seen in the game. It was rumbling and roaring. There was smoke and fire as it came in on this dramatic descent to the surface. And I ran alongside the landing pad, just jumping in this low-gravity environment. And I was giggling. I was just so thrilled to see this big thing coming down. It's just a very normal moment in this game, but it was something that really struck me as special. And there is a lot of that in Starfield. It's packed with small moments that really sing in the imagination, I would say. Another side quest that really leaped out for me, it was just a minor side quest, nothing major, not attached to any main quest. Someone in a bar asked me to go and collect something for them from a derelict ship. So far, so normal. So I went up into orbit. There was a standard spaceship assault. I found the ship and docked with it. But this was a ship that was suffering. It was kind of shutting down around me. It was in pieces, really, kind of coming apart. And as I went into it, there was a huge metallic thud that rang through the whole space, and the lights flickered and went out, and the gravity engine just gave out. So suddenly I was floating. Everything that was on the floor around me, all the notepads, the pens, the mugs, all of the ephemera that fills this very busy world, all started to float. And suddenly I was floating through a dark corridor. A few seconds later, there was another big thud. The gravity came back on, the lights flashed, everything dropped down and scattered on the ground, and I was back on the ground again. And so I was suddenly doing combat with these spacers in a station that had gravity and then didn't, was light and then dark, so much noise, so much texture, all of these items floating in the air, and having to vary my play between stalking across the floor, being in cover, and then being in zero gravity in big caverns and floating around and taking pot shots at people. Just absolutely thrilling mission. And not a major mission at all, just a normal Radiant quest, you could say. So even the small encounters in this game just have the potential to turn into something that you really weren't expecting. And the final one that I'll flag up here, it's part of a faction quest, but I don't think it's a big spoiler. It's a rescue mission on Mars. I won't spoil which questline it's on, but it involved going to a mine, something that you will do a lot. You'll go to a lot of abandoned installations. This was just an abandoned mine shaft on Mars. You have to go and find someone there. You do a spacewalk to get there across the surface of Mars. Absolutely wonderful, just doing these giant leaps, an astronaut fantasy basically in low gravity with a beautiful dusty red light, dim sunlight. It takes a couple of minutes to get there, so you really enjoy the Martian spacewalk on your way there. And then when you get to the mine, it's not just a simple installation, it is deep. There are walkways and tunnels, there are little office caravans covered in dust and hone rock passages, and it just goes down and down and down. And there were bouts of combat all the way down, tons of loot, fighting in these giant spaces, and then tight packed corridors, hacking safes, opening lockers, experiencing this desolate environment of an old mine, just feeling like you're really at the bottom of a pit on a far-flung moon. It's such a vivid experience. And then when you get to the very bottom, there's a deep void. And I thought, well, where do I go now? I can't see the way forward. And realizing that because it's low gravity, I have to just leap over the void and use my little jetpack, float over. And I held my breath as I leapt to get to the final destination of this mine descent. It was just an absolutely thrilling experience. And I think when you're talking about this game, you do have to talk also, of course, about the bugs. I think it was a big question that was hanging over Starfield was how Bethesda-ish will it be? If you've played Skyrim, you've probably seen NPCs just spinning on the spot. You've seen, if you've been in Fallout, you've seen parked cars just flip off into the sky. Like the gravity is a little bit odd in Bethesda games. And this is a new version of their creation engine. It's Creation Engine 2. It is an upgrade on the engine that was used for former Bethesda games. and I would say it's a lot more stable than I was expecting, actually. There is a marked upgrade. There are several marked upgrades in it. The lighting is completely different to other Bethesda games. The quality of light, there is beautiful volumetric fog. There are all different kinds of electric light, sunlight, dim environment, dusty environments. It's very, very visually rich and a huge visual upgrade in that sense on former Bethesda games. But it's full of bugs as well. I would say less so than the other ones. I've only had one crash where there was some kind of problem where the game was just slowing down every time I opened a menu until it just froze. I had to restart the game, but it had quick saved, so it was no problem. There are problems with collision, enemies clipping through doors, being able to shoot you through walls sometimes, things like that. If you come to a locked case, sometimes the weapon will be sticking through the glass and you can just grab it without picking the lock. There is, of course, the famous Starfield meme, which has been very, very funny online. I don't know if you've seen it, but NPCs look really weird in this game sometimes. Sometimes they look fantastic. For example, whenever someone's wearing a space helmet, there are lights on the inside of the helmet that just beautifully illuminate their face and make them look actually quite good and realistic. Not like Horizon levels, but really, really good. But in different lights, they can look very bad. They can look very plasticky and stiff. And there's been a lot of NPCs that just have wide popped eyes and look at you with this kind of horrified expression as you're just walking around streets specifically. So Starfield has been very funny as well. There is also some weird NPC behavior. Like your companions might say, "It's great to be back on our home ship," in the middle of a mission when you're very far from your ship. Their spacesuits will also sometimes vanish because they have two types of garb, spacesuited and helmeted, and just civilian clothing. And sometimes their suits will vanish and yours might vanish or reappear, which is obviously a little immersion breaking if suddenly your companion is running around in their leather jacket and cowboy hat on the surface of the moon. There's also a lot of physics fuckery as well, like stuff spinning and jiggling. Some objects just seem to have a mind of their own. Spaceships might just suddenly start to spin strangely, like there's been a glitch in the way that the game is handling gravity. But I really actually love the gravity in this game, as I was describing earlier. The way that all of the ephemera of this dense world will float is very cool, but sometimes objects just misbehave. And there are a couple of just plain old bugs as well. Like I met an NPC when I first spoke to them. All of their dialogue lines, their voice-acted lines, triggered simultaneously. So they said 100 things at once over the top of all of the others. Very, very disconcerting. So this game does have Bethesda jank, as it is known, but nothing that interrupted my journey too much, honestly. It's much more low-key than in other Bethesda games, and they've done a great job with neatening it up. And I think that the visual upgrade, in the right conditions, it can look breathtaking. In the wrong conditions, it can look old. Like, I think vegetation in this game is very stiff. They really do look like video game assets that have been plonked down into a map. But then other times, you'll be walking across a landing pad with mist and dim sunlight shining and blooming through the fog. And it's just breathtaking and spine-tingling. So it's a real mixed bag, I would say, but the bugs haven't damaged my playthrough, that's for sure. There is one more topic I wanted to touch on before we round out this little description of my time with Starfield so far, and that is the nostalgic Americanism of this game, which is pretty interesting, because I think that all of Bethesda's sci-fi games are steeped in nostalgic Americana. If we think about Fallout 4 with the Humphrey Bogart-esque Nick Valentine, with Mo Cronin, a baseball devotee who doesn't know the rules of baseball or what it is and almost treats it like a religion, is wearing a glove, has a bat, is wearing a uniform and everything. All of the games that Bethesda have made have been steeped in this nostalgic halcyon Americana. I mean, this game is no different, but for some reason it hit different this time. I think Fallout is obviously retrofuturism, so it has that almost built into it, and it is set literally in the United States, so it makes more sense. But in the Starfield universe, this brave new frontier of the universe, it's a little strange that you meet so many cowboys, for example. Like the Freestar Collective are this Texan or Midwestern super American, old school, almost prospector, homesteader kind of vibe. It feels a little out of place somehow. It's like a NASA game, it has that NASA positivity to it, but Constellation themselves, they're an explorers organization, and they're based out of what seems to be like a wood-paneled colonialism museum. There are oil paintings of founding father types and models of ships with sails, and it's a bit of a jarring environment. It snapped me out of this bold sci-fi vision just a little. I think that this is a game that is at its strongest when it leans into the sci-fi, when it leans into the future, when we go to Mars and we see what future industrialism looks like, future mining, the cyberpunk aspect of it all with corporations and stuff. That's the future that I want out of this game. But there is that strange, jarring air of reassuring Americana that feels a little out of step with the America that we know today somehow. The America that we know today is no longer that positive vision of the past, which has been, shown up over time to not be the case. We've had oil wars, we've had regime change, we've had, drone strikes, black ops, Trump, for God's sake, all of that stuff. And so Starfield's rose-tinted Americana seems to supposedly kind of hark back to a previous vision of what America could be. And I get that. I get that feeling of wanting to go back to a simpler time somehow, to reset the world, and to have America be great again or whatever. But it comes across weird. It comes across like glassy-eyed, rose-tinted fanfic somehow. This is not the America that we know. And if all of the governments of the world had combined into the United Colonies, it's a bit weird that it's basically America in space, a global or a universal good guy figure. I feel like the blush has been off that rose for a long time. And it made me think that perhaps Todd Howard and the developers at Bethesda are a little behind the times in terms of the state of what America is, and maybe they are looking back to their own youth. I imagine that they were around at the time of the space race. Maybe they were kids back then. So there is a certain dusty old nostalgia to it that felt out of place to me in this future world. It's strange to see cowboys running around, and it landed a little strangely with me. I feel a little unqualified to talk about this, I have to say, as a European, as an English person living on the outer skirts of Europe in Iceland here. But there is something about that halcyon Americana sensibility that's meant to be like a reassuring, optimistic, old-timey America, which felt a little retrogressive, felt a little out of step with the current day that we're in, and didn't quite land with me somehow. I found it snapped me out of the sci-fi of it all a little bit, I think there have been other visions of the future that have had more of a hard edge or more of a contemporary feel to them, like Cyberpunk 2077, with that Asian American crossover with technology, with body mods, with punks, with all of this kind of future vibe, a commentary on capitalism and ownership, exploitation, selfhood, all of those big sci-fi themes. None of that is really here. It feels very clean somehow. And Bethesda have described this game as NASA punk. There is no punk in this game. It's NASA core, I would say. I think perhaps the writers and the general sensibility of Bethesda comes apart just a little bit under scrutiny, and it just seems a little strange. I would be very curious to hear about this from actual Americans, like how Americans feel about the way that America is portrayed in this science fiction future, because this is a very, very American space fantasy. So just to round it out, I think I'll run through a few of the highs and lows of the game. I will be coming back to this game in the future, but for sure the highs are the sense of awe that you get in this game, the sense of depth, the sense of possibility. I've had play sessions where I just completely ignored all of the story content and just decided to fly around for a few hours, just going to different moons and seeing what I found there. And there was always something good to find. This is a vast game. It's on such an impressive scale. And the basic gameplay loop of it all is wonderful. So even if it is disjointed at times, menu heavy at times, and buggy at times, just the content, the voice acting, the things people say, the depth of the world, and the way that the world building is distributed through all of the moons, all of the civilian outposts, all of these different flavors, all of the factions. There is a different look and a different perspective that all of them have that's just been really thrilling. All of the small moments in the game add up to something really special, I think. This is a special game. It has had me obsessed with it, and I've just loved my time with it. Of course, for the negatives, it is buggy, it is sometimes retro in some ways. It has that strange flavor of Americana that I was talking about. The space travel is a little lacking. Very, very menu heavy, very fast travel heavy, all of that stuff. The encumbrance needs looking at. I'm curious if modders or future patches might address that as a very, very common complaint of the game. But all in all, I've just had the most wonderful time with this. I'm happy to have talked it all out. We're getting on for an hour now, so if you've gotten this far, then I hope that you enjoyed hearing me talk about it too. I'll talk about this game again in the future, but for now, that's my take on Starfield. That was a really fun episode for me to make. I hope that you enjoyed my ramblings, my notes and thoughts on the game. I've been dying to talk about it, honestly. I've been really swept up in it, so it's really fun to talk all of that out. All of those thoughts have just been rattling around in my mind as I've been playing the game, so it's really fun to get them out. I hope you enjoyed this episode. If you did, let me know. It always makes me feel good when people enjoy the show. You can find me on social media pretty much anywhere as Gaming in the Wild. There is, of course, also the Discord. If you'd like to come into our Discord, join in the group discussion on Starfield in the dedicated channel and get bonus episodes and meet the community of listeners that's grown up around this podcast, you're very welcome to join us. It's patreon.com/gaminginthewild. You can sign up for $1 or $3 or $5 a month. You get a lot of good stuff, and we have a really solid community around the show. And I am excited to get that 50th Patreon subscriber and hit that little goal. All new subscribers also get a thank you on the show itself and in the show notes too. So that's it for this week. Hope you enjoyed it. I'll be back next week with another episode. I've got a feeling it might be a Starfield spoiler cast. Who knows? Let's see how I get on in the next week. Thanks very much for listening. Take care of yourselves and each other, and bye-bye for now.